On August 16th, a friend called 911 from an apartment in Greenville, South Carolina, and told the dispatcher that a 36-year-old woman was unresponsive and in cardiac arrest. Paramedics arrived within minutes and began advanced life support. They could not bring her back. At 2:32 that afternoon, Hayden Panettiere, the actress millions of people grew up watching as Claire Bennett on Heroes, and later as Juliet Barnes on Nashville, was pronounced dead. Within a day, the Greenville County Coroner's Office confirmed something that only deepened confusion. Her autopsy found no signs of trauma, no injury, no obvious explanation. Just a healthy-looking scene, a devastated family, and a question that still hasn't been answered. What actually happened to her? Panettiere's death landed with the kind of shock that only hits when someone's been part of the cultural furniture for 2 decades. She wasn't a distant celebrity most people vaguely recognized. She was a face people had followed since childhood, first as a kid actress in the early 2000s, then as a cheerleader who could apparently save the world, then as the ambitious country star navigating fame and motherhood on primetime television. Her openness about her own struggles, published just months earlier in her memoir, made this lost land differently. She had already told the world, in her own words, that life had not been easy behind the scenes. Now that same honesty is being read back with a different weight. Here's what investigators actually know and what they've been careful to say they don't know yet. Greenville police responded to calls shortly before 2 in the afternoon on August 16th. When they arrived, Panettiere was already in cardiac arrest inside a residence where she had reportedly been staying temporarily. Emergency responders performed advanced cardiac life support on scene, but the effort failed. Police stated early on that there were no signs of foul play or suspicious circumstances, and the coroner's office echoed that after her autopsy was completed the next day, on August 17th, confirming there was no physical trauma involved in her death. That single detail, no trauma, is doing a lot of work in this story. It rules out an accident involving injury, a fall, or violence. What it does not do is tell us why a 36-year-old woman's heart simply stopped. That's where the case currently sits, and where a lot of the online speculation has gotten ahead of facts. Toxicology testing was ordered as part of the standard investigative process, and results like that typically take several weeks to come back from the lab. In the meantime, details from the initial 911 dispatch audio leaked to entertainment outlets, and some of them referenced the word overdose. That single word spread fast, but it's important to say clearly, dispatchers use working language based on what a caller reports in a moment of panic, and that language is not a medical or legal conclusion. Authorities have been explicit that no official cause of death has been determined, and that any reference to an overdose in early call audio has not been confirmed as the actual cause. Reports also indicated that Narcan, a medication used to reverse opioid overdoses, was found inside the residence. Again, its presence alone does not confirm what happened. It's a detail investigators are weighing along with everything else, not a verdict. What has added another layer to this story is that police are reportedly not simply waiting on lab results. According to law enforcement sources cited by entertainment outlets, investigators visited the family home of Panettiere's boyfriend in the days following her death, reportedly seeking information connected to the circumstances around it. Officials have said this is part of a broader effort to rule out any criminal element before finalizing the cause and manner of death, which is a standard step whenever someone young and outwardly healthy dies suddenly and unexpectedly. It does not mean charges are coming. It does mean the case remains formally open and that the coroner and police are running parallel investigations rather than treating this as a closed, straightforward medical event. To understand why this death shook so many people so hard, you have to go back to who Hayden Panettiere actually was on and off screen. She started acting before she was old enough to really understand what fame meant, landing roles in national commercials and films as a young child, then breaking through with a string of family films in the late 90s and early 2000s. By the time she was a teenager, she was starring in Heroes, playing a girl with the power to heal from any injury, and detail that a lot of fans have found almost unbearably ironic in the days since her death. That show made her a household name almost overnight, and she carried that same level of visibility for years afterward, moving into Nashville where she played a country music star wrestling with ambition, addiction, and motherhood, often blurring uncomfortably close to details from her own life. Long before Nashville, Panettiere had already built one of the more unusual resumes in Hollywood for someone her age. She was doing national commercial work as a toddler, appeared in daytime soaps before she was 10, and had a lead film role by the time most kids her age were still in elementary school. She voiced In A Bug's Life. She played a competitive figure skater in Ice Princess. She showed up in the Scream franchise, in Remember the Titans, in a string of family films that made her a familiar face to an entire generation before heroes ever put her name in a title card. That kind of career arc, spanning literally her whole life, meant she never really had a version of herself that existed outside of being watched. Fans who grew up with her didn't just recognize her from one role. They'd been seeing her in some form since they were kids too, which is part why the news of her death has felt less like losing a celebrity and more like losing someone people quietly grew up alongside. That closeness between the roles she played and the life she was living became more obvious this year, when Panettiere released a memoir titled This Is Me, A Reckoning. In it, she wrote candidly about growing up inside the entertainment industry as a child, about the pressure of being the family's primary earner from a young age, and about a strained relationship with her mother, who had also served as her manager for years. She also wrote openly about her own battles with alcohol and opioid use, and about the postpartum depression she experienced after the birth of her daughter. She talked about those chapters not as scandal, but as survival, as things she had lived through, and was choosing to speak about honestly, on her own terms, rather than have them uncovered by someone else. That memoir came out just months before her death, and reading interviews from that period now feels different. She sounded like someone taking stock of her life, not someone in crisis. But grief has a way of making people search old interviews for warning signs that may or may not have actually been there, and it's worth being careful about reading a tragic ending backward into everything that came before it. It's also worth remembering that recovery, for most people, isn't a straight line with a finish line at the end of it. Addiction specialists and mental health professionals generally describe it as an ongoing process, something people manage for years rather than something they saw once and moved past permanently. Panettiere herself talked about her sobriety in those terms in interviews tied to her memoir, describing good stretches and hard stretches rather than presenting herself as someone who had simply fixed the problem and closed the book on it. That's a more honest way to talk about it than the version we usually get from celebrity profiles, and it's part of why so many people responded to her so strongly. She wasn't performing wellness for an audience. She was describing something messier and more real, which makes the uncertainty around her death even harder to sit with, because there's no way to know yet whether it connects to any of that at all. Panettiere's family had already been through devastating loss once before. In February of 2023, her younger brother, Jansen Panettiere, also an actor, was found dead in his New York apartment at just 28 years old. His family later confirmed that his death was caused by an enlarged heart combined with aortic valve complications, a medical condition, not an accident or an overdose. Hayden spoke about that loss publicly in the years since, describing how deeply it affected her, both emotionally and physically. She talked about becoming withdrawn afterward, about gaining weight, about a period where she struggled to leave her house at all. Losing her only sibling reshaped her in ways she said she was still working through. Now, less than 4 years later, her family is grieving again, and this time it's her. Her father, Alan Panettiere, released a statement on behalf of the family shortly after her death was confirmed, describing her as a light who had brought immense love and joy to everyone who knew her, on screen and off. It was short. It was clearly written by someone in the earliest, rawest stage of grief. Panettiere is survived by her 11-year-old daughter, Kaya, whom she shared with her former fiancé, retired heavyweight boxing champion Vladimir Klitschko. The two were together for years and had planned to marry before eventually separating, and Panettiere had spoken in interviews about co-parenting and about how much her daughter had grounded her during difficult periods of her adult life. In more recent years, she had been in a relationship with actor Brian Hickerson, whose family home police reportedly visited as part of the ongoing investigation, a detail that has understandably drawn attention, though it has not been tied to any specific allegation at this point. Professionally, Panettiere was still actively working right up until her death. Her most recent film, a psychological thriller called Sleepwalker, was released earlier this year, and she didn't just star in it. She also served as an executive producer, a role that reflected where she said she wanted her career to go next: more creative control, more ownership over the kinds of stories she told. Colleagues who worked with her on that project and others have described her in the days since as dedicated, funny, and generous with younger cast members. Someone who remembered what it was like to grow up in front of camera and try to make that experience easier for others. The public reaction since her death has been enormous, and it hasn't been uniform. A huge portion of it has been simple grief. Fans posting clips from heroes in Nashville, former co-stars sharing memories, people who grew up watching her career unfold now processing the fact that she's gone. But there's also been a less comfortable layer to the coverage, with some outlets running with unverified details from the dispatch call before the coroner had said anything official, and speculation online moving faster than the actual investigation has. That gap between what's confirmed and what's assumed is exactly why the pending toxicology results matter so much. Until they're released or until the coroner issues a final ruling, anything beyond the cause and manner of death remain under investigation is speculation, not fact, no matter how confidently it's repeated in a comment section or a headline. There's also been a noticeably different tone from people within the entertainment industry itself, compared to the general public reaction. Several actors and former co-stars have spoken not just about losing a friend, but about how her death has reopened conversations about the pressures placed on young performers, especially those who, like Panettiere, essentially grew up as working professionals before they were old enough to vote. Child performers are often navigating contracts, public image, and financial responsibility for their families at an age when their peers are still figuring out homework schedules. Panettiere talked about that reality herself in interviews around her memoir, describing how disorienting it was to realize, as an adult, how much of her childhood had actually been shaped around being employable rather than simply being a kid. That's not a new conversation in Hollywood. But her death has given it fresh weight, particularly among people who came up in the industry alongside her during the same era of teen television. It's worth pausing on the toxicology process itself, since it's the piece everyone is actually waiting on. A standard post-mortem toxicology screen test for a wide range of substances, including prescription medications, over-the-counter drugs, alcohol, and illicit substances, and the lab work involves multiple stages of testing confirmed results before anything becomes official. That process routinely takes anywhere from a few weeks to a couple of months, depending on the jurisdiction and how many substances need to be confirmed or ruled out. It's slow specifically because it's meant to be accurate rather than fast. A coroner's office would rather issue one correct final ruling than several premature ones, which is part of why officials in this case have repeatedly declined to speculate beyond what the autopsy itself showed. That caution can feel frustrating to a public that wants answers immediately, but it exists for a reason. An incorrect early conclusion in a case like this can follow a person's family for the rest of their lives. It's also worth sitting with the fact that Panettiere had spent real effort trying to be honest about her own struggles precisely so that people wouldn't have to guess. Writing a memoir about addiction and postpartum depression is not something people do lightly, especially not while still working in an industry that tend to punish that kind of vulnerability. She talked in interviews around the book's release about wanting other people, especially other mothers, to feel less alone in what they were going through. Whatever the toxicology results ultimately show, that part of her story is already something concrete. She used her own pain to try to make things easier for someone else. That's not nothing, and it shouldn't get lost underneath speculation about her final hours. At this point, here's what we can say with confidence, and here's what we genuinely cannot. We know Hayden Panettiere was found in cardiac arrest at a residence in Greenville, South Carolina, on August 16th, and that she was pronounced dead that afternoon despite emergency efforts to save her. We know her autopsy, completed the following day, found no signs of trauma. We know police have stated there's no indication of foul play so far, while also confirming they're continuing to investigate the circumstances, including a visit to family connected to her boyfriend. We know toxicology results are pending and could take weeks. And we know that references to a possible overdose in early call audio, along with the presence of Narcan at the scene, have not been confirmed as the cause of her death by any official source. What we don't know, and won't know until the coroner completes their work, is what actually caused her heart to stop that afternoon. It's tempting, in stories like this, to want a clean answer immediately, something to explain a loss that otherwise feels senseless. But the honest, responsible thing to do right now is to wait for the people actually doing the investigation to finish their work, rather than filling that uncertainty with assumptions. Hayden Panettiere spent the last chapter of her public life being unusually candid about her own difficulties, in the hope that it might help someone else feel less alone. The least we can do while her family waits for real answers is give her story the same care she gave her own, grounded in what's actually known, and respectful of everyone still living through this loss. If updates come from the coroner's office or from police in the weeks ahead, they'll be worth covering carefully and accurately, not rushed out for the sake of being first. For now, what's clear is simple enough. The entertainment world lost someone who mattered to a lot of people. Her daughter lost her mother. Her father lost a second child in under 4 years. And the real facts of what happened are still being worked out by the people whose job it is to get them right. If this video gave you a clearer, more accurate picture where the story actually stands, consider subscribing for calm, fact-check coverage as more details come out.